of this unprecedented crisis of COVID in India, where we thought it may assist companies and people to have a new perspective or maybe a solution to their challenges. I'm grateful to each of our panelists today, as well as the panelists who have been there part of the first two sessions, who had readily agreed to selflessly share their insight built over years of very sound experience of theirs. So let me begin with the introduction of the panelists. Arun Gupta. Arun, it would be nice if you can raise your hand. Great. He's the ex-CIO, master IT strategist, mentor, and coach. His experience span over various industries as CIO, which includes Shoppers Shop, Cipla, K. Raheja, Philips Electronics, and Pfizer. Arun has also played an advisory role for a number of CEOs and has represented boards of many companies to provide his highly insightful guidance on technology. With his exposure in wide spectrum of industries, Arun's view can be of immense value in context of the risk mitigation and efficiency improvement leveraging technology. Let me go to the next panelist, Anil Garg.
Hi.
I Anil comes with an ocean of experience of over 40 years building and managing large-scale IT setups. His major part of the career was associated with Dabur as a CIO, where he enabled the organization to build their complete IT landscape comprising of host of applications, ERPs, networks, and also successfully establishing IT outsourcing. Anil holds master's degree in applied maths from IIT Roorkee and master's in computer science from BITS Finland. Post his debut with Dabur, Anil chose to help a number of organizations in making IT as a business enabler instead of data crunching machine, which is unfortunately the case with many companies. Anil understands well challenges of SMEs and large corporates, and considering the same, his views will be of huge value in context of the topics today. Madhvi. Madhvi Kanumuri. Madhvi, do you mind raising your hands? Thank you. Madhvi is the CIO of the Global Healthcare Enterprise. He is a dynamic leader who has transformed IT landscape of SCE through technological and digital innovation. He's almost over 24 years of experience and has held several leadership positions in US and India. It's vital to understand from her how she ensured business continuity in this tiring time and what initiatives were taken by her which helped her address the challenges of this unprecedented time most effectively. Now going to now our agenda, which all of you are aware about, we are looking for having the perspective of each of these stalwarts in the IT and who understands technology well, who understand business well, their perspective on business continuity and disruption resilience. Second point of the agenda is what's the impact on shared services due to COVID-19. And the third, which is very vital, is COVID-19 fast-tracking digital transformation. So let me begin with Arun. Arun, business continuity plan was primarily a paper exercise, which I understand, for regularity compliance, and was most enterprise kind of related BCP with ITDR. Committees focused on DR without really looking at a business continuity. What should companies really do in the situation like this? Because ITDR is not going to ensure business continuity. It's only the infrastructure continuity, which we are talking to a great extent. So, Arun, over to you, Arun. Can I have your view on this?
Sure, thank you. So, yeah, historically, whenever people talked about business continuity, the discussion was always around, is my IT system going to be available? Should we not be able to come to work? And that is where typically most organizations stopped rather than continuing to say, okay, while the IT system is available, how do I ensure my business continues to work? Because business is not just about your primary systems being available, it is a lot more than that. If you are in the manufacturing industry, it's all about your supply chain upstream and downstream, about distribution, about being able to reach out to your customers. If you're in the services business, it is going to, ITS will be pretty important as a part of the business continuity. But having said that, how are you going to ensure the entire ecosystem is able to work along with you? Only in recent times, I've been seeing some of the mature organizations making BCP a part of their risk discussions, which happen largely with the board member. There's a risk committee, most public sector companies would have it. Most companies who are listed would have it. And in the early days, I realized the discussion is all about, have we tested our ITDR? And I'm saying, yes, I have tested the ITDR. I can ensure you will have 100% capacity. But what about the rest of the organization? And when the current situation hit everyone, IT continued to work. IT was not really a challenge. Probably for some organizations, it was about, do I have enough capacity to allow additional VPN connectivity? Do people have adequate infrastructure in their homes? Are their machines secure? Well, if they were using laptops that are issued by the organization, all of that was true. It was possible to use all of that. But for people who, and many organizations have this policy, they will not give laptops to everyone. That is where the struggle started for a lot of them. They had to struggle, initially try to figure out, what do I do with giving them some compute, which can be connected back into my infrastructure. As the lockdown extended, what happened to all of us? We realized there's only that much operations that is required, because unless business is happening, what are you going to do with the operations? If you had a good ability to service your customers on the internet, yes, you did have some business, but then supply chain shut down. Again, that created an impact. So business continuity needs to be looked at holistically by every organization. I don't think there's one template that can be applied across. It will vary by industry. It will vary by the size of the company and the kind of customers they have. But yes, those are conversations, I think, a good time for CIOs and IT leaders to start having, because IT leaders face the brunt of what happened now. And I think by virtue of that, they should be able to go back to their respective organizations, management and board, and have a conversation to say, great, we probably survived a lot of things during the last 2 months and 3 months of lockdown. What can we do to be prepared for the future? Maybe something different will come up. We don't know. Maybe there will not be a lockdown kind of a scenario, but then you never know what will hit you next time. Surya, you are on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. No, could you suggest some of the key elements of these templates which you're suggesting for setting up the business continuity plan? Now, having experienced this unprecedented crisis, I mean, we don't have the experience, nobody has the experience of such a kind of a crisis. So what's the kind of elements of that template which comes to your mind?
So like I said, templates cannot be universal. It will probably vary by industry. I can tell you about some of the industries where I have recently consulted. For example, in retail. Now retail, it is all about people visiting a location or ordering online. When you visit a location, whether it's a shop or a mall or a standalone store, you have two types of spending. One is discretionary, one is basic necessities. In times like this, you're not looking at discretionary, you're only looking at basic necessities. And fortunately, almost all the mom and pop shops came up to that challenge and started providing that service to all of us. What can a retailer do? I guess the best example is DMart, which was able to continue servicing. Not too many other big box retailers or organized retailers were able to manage. But again, the big challenge they had was inventory. How much inventory are you going to keep? Most of the retailers work on frugal inventory because inventory is cost. How would you look at that in the scenario where you're talking about discretionary spend? Most of them are stuck with inventory which is 3 months old. It is not necessarily fresh anymore, which could be a loss. If you look at the pharma industry again typically works with about 6 to 8 weeks of raw material that they have available. Are they going to increase that now to 2 months and 3 months? If they do, it has an impact on working capital. It has an impact on ability to store all that material, which maybe you may or may not have that warehouse space. You may or may not have a warehouse for the finished goods, because if you continue producing, you will have to store it somewhere before it can go out into the supply chain. But all of that can only happen when you have people on the ground. Manufacturing has been one of the big hits because people did not come into the factories. And I'm sure Anil can share a lot of that because he worked in the manufacturing industry, especially FMCG, for a long time. So I'm sure he will have a lot more insights, deeper insights on that. So I'm saying I can't really define a standard template that would work for everyone. I guess it varies from company to company, industry to industry. If you're in B2B business, it's probably different compared to a B2C scenario versus if you're into services. So for you, for example, your services business, it all on the cloud. Customers can continue to access it. What would be your business continuity? Your business continuity would be all about ensuring availability, right? But then when you are doing a market making activity there on your platform, unless the supplier has the ability to service my request, I have just created a transaction, but I have not fulfilled the transaction.
Very true. Great. Thanks, Anil. It was interesting. I think the examples which you gave were very appropriate in terms of retail and services. And I think each one has required to evolve his own template in order to ensure that his critical parameter of continuity of the services or the business function is most effectively in the given situation is carried out. I think there is one more interesting area, which is what I'm curious to know, that Anil, do you foresee a complete change in the way a board should look at the business continuity plan, including the overall ownership of it, as most of the organizations feel that this is only the responsibility of the CIOs? So it'll be interesting to have your perspective. What's the role which a board is required to play during the time like this?
Okay, so let me backtrace a little bit. About 15 years back, or maybe 12 to 13 years back, when the risk register in the listed companies, like Arun was saying, were formed, VCP was one of the agenda. And most of the big fives also in the boardroom finally concluded that VCP is completed as long as DR is done. Arun mentioned that also. Now, so for quite some time, even in my organization where I was working, it kept on recurring in my agenda, my pending items in mitigation of risk register. But then suddenly I lost my cool, and then we had a very heated discussion in the audit committee meeting where we said, no, it's not my responsibility, it is board's responsibility. And then there was a huge heated discussion. Finally, it was removed from IT pending agenda as far as risk register is concerned. Now that has become very relevant. Arun mentioned it also. But I would like to mention one more thing here. Each and every function, not just board, each and every function in the organization will have to prepare its own BCP. And then there has to be a consolidated BCP for the whole business. Because you see, I'll give you some examples of discussions that I have been having with a couple of colleagues in the industry. You see, initially, a typical scenario of FMCG distribution, you have CFAs and then you have, or you have company-owned depots and then you do the distribution from there. Now, a company, large company, which was in essential goods, was doing business in Bombay. They were supplying everywhere from Bhiwandi. But suddenly they found that because of the pandemic, the Bombay was divided into 4 regions. Now, to travel from Bhiwandi to South Bombay was not easily feasible. So earlier, though the depots were being constructed because of the VAT initially, then in the GST they did some consolidation, but now something else has happened. So what I'm trying to infer from there is that every business function has to look at BCP in slightly more details and try and see, in case something happens, in case my part of the business stops, how do I serve the company? So that's one. The other part is to actually plan BCP and to actually implement BCP, we need a very, very serious change management within the organizations. So I'll start from the top. DOA. We all say we have got an ERP, we have an SAP, we have got BAN or whatever, and we have got DOA which is implemented. So that's as far as the developers are concerned. But are the authorized persons actually accessing system to authorize documents or not? Now, in case we actually trying to move into a situation where we are working from home or we are working from wherever we are we actually accessing systems by ourselves or waiting for our assistants to handle the system? Now, this is something that requires a major change management in all the organizations. And our success as CIOs in the organization will depend on how well we can convince the top management to implement it ruthlessly. That's one. The other thing is, in every possible area, wherever there is a chain of approvals within the organization, effective workflow systems have to be implemented so that in the situation when you are not able to attend to office, you are not able to go to the location, etc., you are still able to work because you don't require any document. So we all talk of paperless office, but actually, is it implemented? So that also again goes back to DOA, delegation of authority actually being implemented on the system. Then comes awareness. Are the senior management people accessing MIS or dashboards by themselves on the organization? Infrastructure. We CIOs take a lot of pride that we have done very fantastic dashboards, beautiful, lovely tools we have used. But when we actually look at it, we find that the assistants are still downloading data into Excel and doing analysis which their manager wants and providing it to him on the Excel sheets. The scenario is changing. Somewhere around 10 to 15 years back, large organizations started removing EAs from the managers because the email came and etc. came. So they said, "Ab tumko shorthand wala nahi chahiye. You don't require a steno," and all that they removed. I think the time has come from when all the clerical assistants should also be removed from the managers. And this is what is a major role of CIOs to explain to the top management to implement. Similarly comes, we have created infrastructure for video conferencing, we have created infrastructure for various things. Is it being effectively used? People are still traveling. Why? So we should be actually asking why the people are still traveling. Now everybody is working from home. So can't they work from home otherwise? It actually saves a lot of cost. It saves a lot of effort. It saves a lot of wasted time. Because if you are going to Bombay to attend a 3-hour meeting, you have spent one full day. Instead of that, you spend only 3 hours and probably half an hour pre-log and post the meeting. So 3.5 hours, you are done. We have created infrastructure. Why it is not being used? Now let me tell you, I come from a background where my father was part of the government machinery. Of course, he retired in 85, so at that time email, etc. was not there. But even today, in the departments, at least I know about the UP because that's where I belong to. State electricity boards, irrigation departments, PWD, all these departments, other than the corporations. The entire infrastructure is there, and people still don't use their email IDs. They still pick up their car and go to manager's office, and in case the mail ID is there, they steno prints the mails and puts it on the table of the boss to sign it off. Now, the same thing was happening, but now once this pandemic happened, everybody joined VC. And the thing started working because the infrastructure was very much there. So I think we should tell the management that, look, we have created this, and we should take pride in that, look, we were the only one who were continuing to serve you while other businesses, other part of your business got affected. So please give us some return to that and try and establish that people start using this. This is also part of BCP indirectly. Then, of course, like he said, infrastructure, maybe the time has come when desktops are no more required. People should move on to laptops. Or maybe desktops are required only at the production shop floor, where whatever. One more thing that is required here is that, you see, in IT companies, when the people work from home, there is a very well defined system to make sure that the people are working. Now, for a businessman or a CEO who is conventional, it's very difficult to appreciate that he will actually have a control on that his manager is actually working on. So there is a need to come with systems, which I would not like to call them as timesheets because that becomes very offensive. Some systems whereby people can actually start recording. Now, if it becomes part of the BCP exercise, then it will be enforced and people will start recording what they are doing. And the management will be happy to know कि हाँ यार लोग काम कर रहे हैं, कोई problem नहीं है. So I think that's another point which is there. So this is what. Period. One more thing here. The KPIs of the individuals have to be probably rewritten now post this pandemic because the business situation will totally change now when the business is opening. I'll give you a very simple example. In FMCG, these days there is a lot of pressure on having negative working capital. So outstanding has to be as little as possible. So try and see that over 90 days outstanding is not there, etc., etc., etc. But now when the business reopens, your distributor and your retailer does not have money. Or we don't know what is his financial situation. So probably we might have to relax credit norms so that we can supply them the goods even if they don't have material. Because if we don't, then somebody else will come and fill the market. And the entire FMCG or consumer goods market works on that only. Whatever gets filled in the shelves, that's what sells. So we need to actually look at all the KPIs once again. Now we cannot suggest directly to the CEO, "Yaar, aap kar lo." But I think somewhere or the other we'll have to gain confidence and tell them this is high time you should do this. And we can always say, look, this is what we are hearing from our colleagues from other organizations. So why don't you look at it? And once he understands the logic, I think they will start looking at it.
Yeah, thanks, Anil. I think primarily what I understand, I think you're talking about an ownership which needs to be percolated down from the board. And again, the top management, it does require a change of technique of managing things. I think the top management will have to relearn many of the lessons of the current technique, which or maybe have to put it on the back burner, many of the current techniques, what they're adopting in managing people, driving more on the results base or performance based metrics. And I completely agree that, as you rightly have put it up, that adoption of any DR plan or any kind of a BCP, which you are putting up any technology, adoption is the most important criteria. And that the top management can lead the way, because if they are insisting and they are using the IT systems effectively, then down the line, it automatically translates the message that everybody is required to adopt the system. So I completely agree with you. Having said that, yeah, please.
That we need to actually put in a DR. The management used to feel, oh, itna kharcha hoga, kya problem hai, aap backup kyun nahi rakhte ho, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Similarly, if you forget about the IT or the industry, so earlier people used to say in 2018 there will be a pralay and the world will finish. People will say it is already bullshit. But today, people will start believing that something like this can happen. So now this has become from no-go or may-go to go-go. That's one. So one has to. The other part is that DR now becomes a very small portion of the entire BCP.
Very true.
Earlier, the DR was the only BCP. So that is what we have to keep in mind, and that's why we have to say, हमारा role बहुत छोटा है, हमको माफ कीजिए, अपना काम कीजिए.
Right. I think, Madhvi, it would be interesting to know that what kind of strategic steps the organizations can take in regards to the BCP, and particularly what you did in HCG or you had done in HCG pre-COVID.
Yeah, thanks, Suhrid. And first of all, thanks for having me. And great insights from Anil and Arun. A lot of, what addresses this particular question has been shared as well. So I'll just little deep dive probably a bit more and maybe talk about what we've done with regards to HCG. And for those of you who don't know, HCG is a chain of hospitals, and we run oncology services across India and in some emerging markets. So that's our footprint. So very specialized services, but it's a hospital network. So a BCP in its original definition is extremely important. And for us, when this happened, and I think Anil and Arun alluded to that, is depending on the nature of the company or the business, the supply chain, if you will, could take various different routes. And for us, it's basically patients coming in and getting treated effectively, right? And that's something that cannot be replaced when a situation like this happens. So for us, what it meant was really connecting very quickly with our patients, whether it's consultation or whether it is something to do with just helping them figure out how to take care of themselves until they're able to come back into the hospital. So it was all about connect from a clinical standpoint. And so some of the decisions that we have made, I think the point that I want to make here is ensuring that we are investing in the right technologies that are forward-looking, that are contemporary, that are in the field of getting more and more automated. Those kind of decisions that we make as we get into the point of making those decision points is extremely important. So evaluating the right technologies and ensuring that we have right technologies in place is paramount. So, and I think fortunately for us, we had done that just about a year ago. We had gone to a single domain across HCG Enterprise. Like I said, it's a chain of hospitals. We have over 24. And all of them were kind of decentralized and in many different locations, but getting them onto a single domain and having the right collaboration technologies and tools in place, which we did last year, helped us really, really well in this current situation. So from a clinical standpoint, we were able to launch our virtual outpatient department in 2 days' time. That's because we had the foundational technologies in place and we had the right partnerships with the right providers. And because of that, we were able to launch it so quickly. And from an enterprise standpoint, I think Anil and Arun kind of alluded to it, that there are a lot of companies that are kind of sort of used to it. Working from home is not a big deal. But there are a lot of companies where you know it's very important traditionally and you know in the past as well as you know coming in, having that conversation, walking to somebody's office. That culture cannot be replaced. And ever since we introduced this technology last year, we've been going through a lot of change management initiatives, training, and coming up with use cases and all that kind of stuff. And when something like this happened, it's just accelerated, right? My adoption went from, you know, a single percent to like close to 100%. So we were all, you know, collaborating, and now it's become the way we work, right? So we still love to go to office and mingle. Nothing can, you know, change that aspect. No virtuality can change that aspect. But work doesn't stop regardless of where you are. So from an enterprise standpoint, again, investing in those right technologies kind of helped us really, really well. So that I think is also a part of BCP. We talk about strategy. Strategy is something that we plan ahead. And one thing that kind of is a learning for me is even though you strategize, you forecast, you think about what the next steps is, where the business is going, what the business growth plan looks, and how you align your technologies to align with those business imperatives is something that we do, right? But who knows when something like this happens, right? I mean, how do you strategically think about these things and plan it in? You just can't do enough. That's one learning. But again, going back to making sure that we're looking at what are the modern technologies, cloud transformation, for example. A couple of our core applications, the primary applications are on the cloud. And so is that a good decision that we made? Did we really think about BCP? Yes, we did. And it was one of the later contemporary technologies, right? Where going from on-prem to cloud was a transformation, the part of digital transformation journey. Now making that kind of a judgment at that point in time, maybe we didn't foresee this, but because that was in place, that came in handy for us. I think one of the biggest things that saved us during this time is cloud. Right, so that becomes your strategic planning. So step number one is looking at contemporary technologies, aligning with the business imperatives and making sure the right investments are made. The second thing is the rigor around BCP. Again, I think my friends on the panel really talked about the difference between BCP and DR. Really, really very different. And I think a lot of people still assume that a BCP is a IT ownership, right? It is really not. You break it up, it's business continuity planning. It's not IT continuity planning, it's business continuity planning. So when you look at that and start asking those questions, talking about, okay, if a hurricane were to happen, or if something were to happen where your entire business is disrupted, how would we ensure? So taking through those logical steps and then fitting IT into it is important. One is obviously the disaster recovery planning. So what we did in HCG since last year is we had a DR drill that is planned every year. We've done that diligently even from before I joined the company. But some of the changes that I think we brought in since last year is let's take that opportunity of that yearly plan that we do for disaster recovery to make it a true BCP. Let us look at, you know, while we ensure that the data is not lost, while we ensure that our DR site is up and running when your primary data center goes down, what are some of those business activities that people have to do? So engaging those business partners, making sure that they're part of this whole conversation and getting them to kind of understand that this is a potentially real life scenario. What are some of the things that you have to do? For example, billing, right? Billing will stop, so I can't discharge the patient. What would you do if the system is down? Me as IT will work on making sure that your DR is up and running, but it's going to take some time. I will make sure that the data is not lost, but maybe it'll get lost. In the meantime, how are you as the business leader, as the billing person, ensuring that billing happens and the patient is discharged? There is some paper baked into it. There are certain templates, but at the end of the day, these transactions have to get back into the systems as well. So how do you, I think Arun kind of rightly pointed out that having those templates based on your particular business is going to be extremely important, and IT is just part of it, right? So that's step number 2. So having that rigor, whatever frequency it is, depending on your business scenario, yearly, twice a year, whatever, that's very important to make sure that this happens. Third thing is adoption. I think you talked about it, Suri. This adoption is extremely important. If we have the right systems and technologies in place, however, the processes are not great, and hence people tend to use paper, which happens. I mean, it happens for various different reasons. Maybe there's adoption is very high, and maybe there's attrition and the training gets lost and the adoption goes down. Whatever the case is, there is that parallel process that can happen. But ensuring to keep an eye on adoption and hence making sure that there are no lost transactions is extremely important, right? And the last that I will point out is the whole change management aspect, right? Making this a continuous process and change management and continuously evolving. Your business scenarios change, your business dynamics change. How do you take care of those cycles and incorporate BCP continuously into that, that whole cycle? I think are the things that have been very helpful for us.
Yeah, I think a very vital point which you made, I think, is about the change management. That irrespective of how good your plan is, again, the adoption is again dependent on how well you're able to manage your changes. Because if you're able to manage change effectively, the chances of your adoption is going to be definitely much, much more better. So I think those are very critical points which you highlighted, that it's not just important to put a business continuity plan. It is to be ensured that this business continuity plan is well tasted, well adapted, well tried out, so that actually when a crisis like this strikes, you are nearly close to being ready to ensure that your business continuity happens. Now, I think we've talked about a lot of efforts, a lot of things which needs to be done internally within the organizations for business continuity. One of the elements which is your external ecosystem, like your partners, your suppliers, your customers, your service providers. How do you make them ready or make them more resilient into a situation like this? Because that's equally important, because you could be geared up completely within the organization, but if your ecosystem is not geared up effectively, or they're not having the desired level of resilience, how are you going to be functional? So Anil, Arun, Madhvi, who would like to take this?
I think, making them part of this whole exercise important. I mean, I talked about business partners, but it's all partners, right? And the external entities are your partners. Like you said, I think you have the best business continuity plan, but my cloud provider doesn't have a good DR or a business continuity plan, then I'm host, right? So that starts at vendor evaluation. Making sure that their BCP and DR are aligned and are in alignment with my SLAs and with my requirements for my business, right? So vendor evaluation. And just like we have our rigor internally, they should also have that rigor internally. And they're obligated to produce those reports for us, share that, and all that kind of stuff, right? The third thing is building redundancy, right? Regardless of what, depending on the criticality of where you're building the business continuity plan, you always have to have a redundancy plan. So worst case scenario, what's going to happen? What's the worst impact, right? These are some of the things, again, going back to strategic planning, that have to be baked in, and they start at the point of evaluation, rigor, and redundancy. And then obviously the continuous evolution process to evaluate how the scenarios have changed and do those plans still hold good? The other important partners that we kind of sort of talked about is our end customers or our business partners, right? Engaging them into this entire exercise. I think I already addressed that, so I won't beat it to death. But yeah, that should be part of the whole plan as well.
Yeah, so I think it's very important to have your sustainability matrix as far as your vendor base is concerned. And I think you need to understand your customer challenges appropriately and see how best you can align to help them resolve some of their challenges so that in a way your business continuity plan also is aligned to your customer's business continuity plan, right? So I think the whole value chain which you need to ensure that it's not just looking at your own self. You need to look at your front end partner. You need to look at your back end partners, and you need to ensure that each of these partners are able to, in a synchronity, able to function most effectively in a time like this. So,
Yeah, there's a very important tool that comes to my mind if it might help people kind of remember this. There's a tool called SIPOC, and some of you all might be very familiar with this, which is suppliers, inputs, process, output, and customers. So you map the entire ecosystem across this and make sure that there's alignment across that. So just a quick tip.
oh, great. Arun wanted to say something. Your mic, yeah.
I wanted to take you back 22 years, 1998, 99, when we were talking about Y2K compliance. And that's the time I saw every company talking to their ecosystem partners and customers to say, are you Y2K compliant? And we helped them in those days to become compliant if they were not, or we created mitigation plans if we understood somebody is not likely to be compliant. The same level of rigor probably needs to come back now towards what Madhavi mentioned, the continuity across the chain. If you don't have that, if you are not aware of your suppliers or your customers' continuity, you are working as an island, and an island, you'll probably then get engulfed by the sea when it comes. And that's happening to some of the companies today.
Right. Thank you, Arun. I think it was an important insight, which is what you shared. And Y2K, I think the whole IT sector has boomed because of the Y2K. We came into the global prominence because of Y2K. No, I just would like to quickly reflect on one of the reads which I had on the McKinsey's report. And typically during the crisis like this, leadership role is a very, very important fact. The leaders are required to lead from the front, and they need to be leading with resolve. I mean, no leaders can afford to because there is no predefined response. The behavior and mindset of the leaders is very, very vital. They are not supposed to overreact to yesterday's developments, and they need to keep a positive outlook ahead. Again, I think the decision-making ability, because today you're not dealing with well-known parameters. There are a lot of unknown parameters. There is a speed of the decision which is needed. So you require information points which are vital, but at the same time, you have to become at times a more prone to risk, a calculated risk, considering that those decisions are vital for keeping the organization metabolism going high. And the last but most importantly is empathy towards your people. I think all your people also are right now living in a complete dilemma. In fact, there is so much of uncertainty, there so much insecurity which is there in their mind. And that is the time where you cannot strictly just depend on your legal people or the HR to handle these issues. You're required to directly communicate and create that confidence in your people so that they can trust you as the leader of the organization. So the leadership has a very, very important role to play when any such kind of crisis which comes up. So having said that, I would like to go to the second point of our agenda on the shared services. And Anil, I would like to understand that what you see as a major change management needed in order to have shared services in a form so that it facilitates the work from home environment most effectively. Your mic is, you need to unmute. Yeah.
So there are actually two parts to it. One is the shared service per se by definition. So I will not get into that. But what I'm trying to say, for me, shared service in this scenario is maybe a corporate's own facility where they try to bring in all possible documents which are to be processed. And when I say processed, I'm talking of mainly either finance or say the so-called, what do you call that, supply chain. So see what happens today. If you look at it in any business, there are three parts. One is the manufacturing. Now manufacturing, you require certain physical presence, you can't avoid it. So I'll come to that little later. Then there is finance and accounts. Then there is entire supply chain, which is the planning and the order processing in terms of for the dispatches, etc. So to my mind, the transaction processing can be centralized as much as possible by way of either moving all the source documents to this place or source documents coming to the actual place and then getting uploaded in the system. So I'll take an example. So you go to a factory which is at a remote location and then there the material arrives because there is a purchase order. So the material arrives, the GRN is prepared, and there's a document, there are a set of documents which come from the vendor along with the consignment. So what the receipt clerk does, it actually uploads all those documents into the system. Now, there is one commercial guy, maybe an accountant or whatever, who just verifies that the original document itself has been uploaded, defaces the original and files it. The entire processing from there on is done by the central place. Now that is what is the basic concept of shared service. Now, since the document is not there and these people can process it without the documents, so they can process it being anywhere in the world. So that is what actually facilitates work from home. Now, of course, as Arun had mentioned earlier, these guys who are supposed to be sitting there should have a laptop, etc., etc. That is something that infrastructure will have to create. So, to my mind, the importance of changing context in shared services, making it as robust as possible for working from home. And it should be completely, even if it's an inside organization center, it should be completely SLA driven so that the management knows, yes, people are working from home, but they are delivering. Like I was saying earlier, there has to be some measurement mechanism that the work is being done. So as long as you do that, I think for any kind of a situation where you can't access the office, where you can't access the workplace, majority of the work can happen. The other point here important is when the manpower moves, shifts because of whatever reason, training new people for a particular job, etc., becomes quite complex. So suppose you have, for example, let's say 40 depots from where you do dispatches, CFA or depot. Everywhere you have an order processing guy who does the order processing, invoice printing, etc., etc. But if there is a centralized center where all the orders are coming, then here you need only a person who can print a PDF file and actually dispatch it. So you don't require computer training out there. So this is another advantage. Now, two things which are important here. One is, like Madhvi said, probably infrastructure moving to cloud now becomes more or less mandatory. Today, it is slightly difficult to explain to the management because of two reasons. One, they say our data being kept at somebody else's place, are we safe? One question. Of course, once you talk of Amazons and Azures and Googles of the world, sometimes that confidence actually comes. And the second point is that the data, when it is kept there, the cost of this cloud today, as per my calculation, comes to around 20% more than the typical on-prem infrastructure. 4 years back, it used to be about 30%. Now it is about 20%. Going forward, it will come down further. So that's a cost which you need to do. Another important part out here is when you do an on-prem infrastructure, it is capex. So people capitalize it, so it doesn't impact their P&L the way they want to. And so it saves the P&L impact. But if you do cloud, then it is entirely subscription, so it is OPEX. So that is one bottleneck out there. So we need to. But now in the context of these kind of situations, probably it might be easy. I'll give you a very simple example here. I have a friend of mine who is a CA. 2 partners or 3 partners, they have a CA firm and they have around another set of 10 people, CAs working for them, and then some articles, etc., etc., etc. So about 40 people. So when that lockdown happened, he said, look, how will I do my work? I'm getting stuck, audit time is coming, everything, it is March, etc., etc., etc. So then I told him that you start doing a meeting on Zoom with your other people and let us see how it works. After a week, he comes back and tells me, whatever I used to do is sitting in my office in 10 hours, now gets done in about 5 hours. And we are able to handle it. Now, the only problem is the data which was residing on the file server, I can't access it because we have a data center in the office. Now, for these kind of setups, if they move to cloud, it becomes very easy. So actually, they don't need an office. So I was actually, another example, I was talking to CEO of one of the companies which deals into food items. He said, I have made a list of all the managers with whom I did not have to contact in last 2 months while working from home. I also asked all my function heads to make a list of such managers whom they did not need to talk to. So we have got a list of certain people. So now we are feeling that are we keeping them in the office only because we have an office? Or they should be redeployed in some other assignment.
Yeah,
so,
I think.
And you see, everybody is under pressure today to cut costs.
I think it was
Cut costs because the cash flows are going haywire, etc. So it helps.
Yeah.
So
I think it
cloud.
was nice
And
to
the
know
other
your
part
wisdom.
is, the other part is, whatever application is not mobile, spend time and effort and money to make it mobile. We still have certain legacy applications running in various organizations which are not mobile. I mean, even if they are on their desktop, but they can't be accessed from a laptop or from a iPad or a tablet or a phone, etc. We need to try and make systems more and more mobile. That's what comes into digital transformation. So one of the basic need of future digital transformation is make everything mobile.
Yeah. Thanks, Anil. I think I would put up the next question on this to Madhvi, that what are your views on the digital transformation of shared services? And can technology provide an edge for optimized operations of shared services?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In my mind, shared services is any back office operation can be made into a shared service, right? And shared services can be anywhere: supply chain, finance, any kind of processes. It's not about a function per se, but it's about the processes within that function. I mean, all of these functions have a very strategic element to them as well, but I'm talking about the processes that are repeatable and reproducible. any process that can be repeated or reproduced becomes a great candidate for shared services. And that can be templatized, SOPs developed, given to people, people sit together and process those. And so it's a great way to cut costs and get more efficiency, while at the same time getting more throughput from a lesser number of people, because you have these very standardized. Now, any process that's reproducible and repeatable also is a great candidate for robotic process automation. So does technology provide an edge? Shared services? Absolutely. I think if there's an organization that wants to try out RPA, shared services is probably a great place to start. In fact, I think there are a lot of templates, bot as service, different bots that have already been developed on some of these back office processes, only because they're so standard, and they can be automated. So when it comes to digital transformation, I think first transformation is non-digital with regards to shared services, but you can just take it a step further and enhance it much more by looking at great candidates for RPAs. I think that's a great way to think about digital transformation for shared services.
Great. Yeah, thanks. I think it's very, very vital. I think duplication of work. I think many times you're running short of skills. What a distributed environment. You have accountability challenges for the similar kind of processes that are distributed environment, compliance challenges, and the visibility. I think these are some of the primary candidates of the services which can be pulled into shared service portfolio, and it can also help to optimize the cost, improve the efficiency and service. At a time like this, I think you're talking of digitization of a limited sector of function to get organization throughput at an organization level.
Exactly.
Anil and Arun, in fact, what's your view on effectiveness of the shared services?
In my lifetime, I have built 2 shared service centers, managed a few others which existed. They are definitely something that every organization should look at, internal or external, because they bring in significant efficiencies because they're working on an assembly line model. It's like a factory, and which is where you can get a lot of efficiencies. Today with RPA and automation, it multiplies. Like Madhuri said, RPA makes a big difference to the productivity of a standard process. Having said that, some people try to go overboard on what they can outsource or what they can put into a shared service. All processes are not easy to manage in a shared service. Wherever you have a lot of exceptions happening to a process or which is not very standard, don't put it in a shared service. I also wanted to raise one point that Anil mentioned on, we have an office so people work there, or people don't have to come to office. I guess conventionally, if you look at the way organizations have grown, it was all about working centrally in one location. And then as people grew, they created more offices, and where the distribution of workforce happened, either by vertical or by horizontal or by function. Sometimes even those got split. Work from home as a concept is not new. IT has been attempting that for a long, long time, especially since the time outsourcing started. Because outsourcing was all about, you don't need people to be on site. They can work from wherever they are. IT led the way for a very, very long time. It's almost 15, 20 years that the IT success story everyone knows about, remote working. Though initial days for the Western world, it was all about arbitrage, but today it's all about efficiency. The metrics have changed. What has to necessarily change now is the mindset of managers sitting in the office. Just because somebody is in front of you or sitting in the office does not mean you control that person's productivity. If you follow Dilbert, you can see there's a wonderful guy called Valley who loves to not work. and he's made an art of it. And there's Dilbert who's continuing to work. But so just because somebody is sitting in the office does not mean the person is going to be productive. There are people who can be productive even when they're not at work. They can work from anywhere whatsoever as long as they have the tools to do that. People talk about timesheets, people talk about metrics, and I'm saying you empower your people, they will deliver. Give them that ability to kind of imbibe what they do. If they believe in what they're doing, they don't necessarily treat it like a job, then they invest in the organization, they invest in what they do. And I've been fortunate, I can say, across most organizations where my teams definitely followed that. I never asked anyone to come to work. I said, you are here because we hold meetings, we do face-to-face meetings. Even that we tried to do in the early days virtually. Unfortunately, infrastructure was not as good as it is today. Connectivity was a challenge for most residential complexes. People using mobile phones or people using dial-up connectivity was not really the best way to work from home. Today with ubiquitous connectivity, I guess that's an opportunity. And the current crisis has hastened that to say, yes, we have now learned 50% of the company can easily work from wherever they are. The balance 50% some probably don't matter. And that's another opportunity for the organizations to look at their staffing levels and why did they build the team that they build. Digital disruption will happen. It will either be forced, like it has happened today for everyone across the board, or it could be industry specific. Industry specific, we have seen lots of them. In the healthcare industry, people have been talking about telemedicine for so long, it's not funny. But suddenly everyone is doing it now. Why couldn't they do it earlier? Why did the doctor need to just check the pulse or use the stethoscope and look at what is wrong with me? I'm describing my symptoms finally, which is what tells you what is wrong with me, right? So I think sometimes we need a catalyst to make some of these things happen.
Yeah, I think I completely agree because I was talking to one of the CIOs of an agrochemical company, and he said that he was trying to push through the adoption of Teams, and that's a global company. And these guys were, they bought the licenses and were trying to put people that why don't you have the online meeting? And today, I think it's the whole company from across the world is demanding access to the Meet user license, and they have close to almost 20,000 meetings happening internally and externally every day. So that's the kind of adoption because it's a very, very large company based out of India, their headquarters, and having operations all across the world. But that's what happened just overnight. It just happened. This guy was struggling
Yep.
for the last 1 year. So I think that brings us to our final topic on whether the COVID has fast-tracked the digital transformation. And Maria, I'd like to start with you. What do you think of the pace which has changed due to COVID in the digital transformation?
That's a great question. And I'm just getting a kick out of your previous example that you just provided is the exact same thing that happened to us as well, right? So we're struggling with Teams adoption, not really struggling. There were some promoters for sure, but it was a slow ramp, right? And this happened and we're all on Teams, completely on Teams, right? So it's just talking about fast tracking digital transformation, I think. That's exactly what we went through. Change management is off the cuff, right? So well, that's been my biggest learning in this whole thing is whenever we try to introduce a new technology as part of the new technology introduction process, we talk about change management being a big aspect, basically trying to change people's mindsets, helping them understand what the tool will do, what's in it for them, strategy, and following that up with training and your champions and champion users and super users and the whole support mechanism to make sure that they don't feel like they're alone and stuff like that. If we can just mock a situation like this, do we need need a complete change management, right? So that's been something that I've been putting a lot of thought into over the last few weeks.
In fact, that's what they say. Necessity is the mother of innovation, and I would say
Absolutely.
necessity is the mother of implementation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. So, and one of that's exactly what I want to point out is adoption, right? Adoption is you can have the best digital transformation journey that you can ever imagine, but if you don't have adoption, it's no good, right? So accelerate this situation has definitely increased adoption. We just talked about one example, but everything working through VPNs or whatever, people just figured out how to get on those systems. And I have zero support tickets in regards to how do I use this, how do I get onto it. They whether it was IT or just friends or family, they just figured it out. They just figured out how to do it from home. So I think adoption kind of skyrocketed. And the third thing is, I would say the time that I take to convince people that we need to think about cloud as a strategic step has drastically reduced. Today, I think I have many conversations where the business stakeholders and the management and everybody says it's a no-brainer. We have to look at cloud. We have to consider cloud. So I think just that thought process helps me a lot more in my own initiatives, if you will. So those are three things that I'll point out that has really accelerated for me.
Great.
Yeah.
So, Arun, I think everybody's talking about digital transformation and how it has taken wings due to COVID-19. What's your view on this? I mean, we are talking about Madhuri expressed a view. I shared with you my own feedback from one of the CIOs. What's your view on this?
So a couple of weeks back, I wrote an article on LinkedIn around what the big company's CEO said. In 2 months, we have achieved more digital transformation than in the last 2 years, thanks to COVID. Did you really do a transformation, or did you react to a survival instinct that was necessary for your organization? Because transformation typically brings about planned results or something that you can sustain. What we did right now was a reaction to a situation because there was no other choice. People who had invested early in the cloud, like Madhuri said, probably had the advantage over everyone else. When Anil said everything should be on mobile, the answer is yeah. For the last 5 years, people have been talking about mobile enabling applications or specific use cases. Even simple things like approvals still don't happen on mobile in 90% of the companies, which is an easy one because in most cases, the approver only clicks yes or has the assistant click yes, right? So today, when people are beginning to do that using technology, did it bring about transformation which was pending, or did it happen because you did not have a choice? I think that's a question worth looking at. But having said that, in the current scenario, if you miss the opportunity going forward, then I don't think you would have the option to be able to push digital transformation within your organization if you miss the boat in the next 6, 9, 12 months. And that's an opportunity for every CXO, not just CIOs, every CXO to take and say, okay, I learned something in the last 3 months. How can I institutionalize this learning? How can I ensure my shop is going to be more effective? It is going to have a lower cost than what it is right now, because these are the things that digitization promises. Look at not just internal process, even look at external process. And that is where the benefit will be much better than just saying, okay, now that I have put in an RPA, I'm on the cloud and my team internally uses mobile, I have achieved digital nirvana. The answer is no, you have not. You have left out a very large ecosystem which is outside your organization. And there are many companies I know who have done that. Unfortunately, there are also companies who focus heavily on the outside and run very, very bad shops internally, where there is a lot of chaos. Information is not necessarily getting consumed the way it should, at least not for decision making. Information internally is largely a rear view mirror. What happened in the last month? What happened in the last quarter? How did I do? You have to start using information to take decisions for the future. I'm not professing predictive analytics or prescriptive analytics, but use information in decision making. And that is where you would say, yes, I'm a digital organization. I'm digital ready, and I can benchmark with anyone else in the world. And that's a good aspiration to set today and sell that to your CEO or your CFO or the board, whoever is going to give you that budget. You don't need a very large budget. It is doable. I saw a few questions that are coming up around the cloud and everything else on the chat box. And I would probably want to refute the point that Anil mentioned. Clouds are 20% more expensive than on-premise. I have in the last 2 years helped organizations move to the, 3 organizations move to the cloud, including a PSU. And in PSUs, cost is looked at a very, very different level because they have the CVC and everyone watching their backs. And guess what? The cloud was on par, if not better, than their infrastructure that they had internally. I have been able to develop a template which I have used multiple times. And every customer who came to me with a question, can I move to the cloud? I said, yes, you can. Let's look at everything that you do on-premise. Why do you do it? Yeah, because probably that was legacy. Doesn't have to continue. And that is a good step towards becoming resilient, towards becoming cloud ready, towards becoming digital. Cloud security, I think it's more of a bogey than reality, because a cloud service provider invests 10x of what you would invest in security because they are in the business. They will always invest more. You will never do that. I've had organizations where I did security briefings and discovered they had worms sitting in their NAS boxes and nobody knew about it. Sensitive data was out in the open.
I think it's a very vital point, which is all the 3 points which you mentioned. We are absolutely bang on. I think reaction and the transformation, these are 2 separate things. And I think if you want to sustain your digitization initiative and the organization is required to reap the long-term benefit, it has to be a transformation. The reaction can only maybe solve the short-term goals of the organization. And I think even if you are reacting, you have to simultaneously think on the transformation, leveraging that particular time.
So 2 months from today, when things start going back towards a normal situation, whatever that new normal is, your organization is going to challenge whatever you did right now and say, you did a lot of ad hoc measures which were necessary at that point of time. What do I do now? Do I need to continue with those costs? When you mentioned somebody is using 20,000 meetings virtually, yeah, they are probably effective. They have saved on travel. But somebody is going to come back who looks at ratios and say, my IT cost as a percentage of revenue has gone up. I'm saying, come on, give me a break. Look at the efficiency we created. Look at the survivability that we created. So the ad hoc has to become sustainable. Maybe some of the things you don't need anymore. You'll have to shut them down. Whatever you had as legacy, which did not help you now, you need to relook and say, what do I shut down? Because I have not used it when I needed it the most. It's like the Diwali cleaning that all of us do. Now, do IT Diwali cleaning.
Right.
Those applications get rid of that infrastructure that probably doesn't get used. I had a term that I had coined a long time back called digital orphans, which are the applications that all IT organizations build or the infrastructure that they build, which never gets used by the business. I'm saying get rid of that orphanage now.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, on the cost front also, I think it was quite interesting what you reflected. I think general impression on the cloud cost is above par. That's if you're looking at on-prem and cloud cost. And I think it would be interesting to see your model. And the security, I completely align with you that today, if you're talking about any of the cloud companies, any of the cloud service provider, be it AWS, be it Google, be it Azure, any of these cloud survival, they have the top of the line security which has been put in place. So I am completely aligned with you. Now coming to Anil, I think we're talking about this digitization process. How do we bring agility into this entire process of digitization? Because like people keep on thinking and planning, execution is one of the biggest challenge which is most companies have.
You see, the technical aspect has been discussed very well. I would like to add just 3 points here.
Yeah.
One, so time has come when if you are considering work from home and if you are considering digital transformation in the organization, to look at HR policies once again from the beginning. And maybe for some time they could not be general for the whole organization. The part of it could be employee specific initially. Then later on you might say, okay, now this actually comprises of 5 business rules and these people they apply this rule, these people they apply this rule, etc. That's one. Second thing is there has to be, we do a lot of, when most of the organizations, when you do the PMS, the training requirements the HOD is supposed to write, and most of them, very easily say time management, communication improvement, etc., etc. Nothing gets done, and these forms get filled just like that. So my view is there is a need to do extensive training on using the collaboration tools across organizations. Very simple. Even if when you are doing a meeting on a net meeting or a Zoom or whatever, there has to be certain etiquettes, there has to be certain rule that one has to follow to make the meeting more effective. That's one. Similarly, using these small tools, how to make sure your broadband is working. If your broadband is not working, now you might need a DR for your broadband at the house also. Like you were having 3 broadband lines yesterday, so you will need to move that also. And the third part is that if there is a lack of collaboration tools within the organization as of today, then that is something that needs to be implemented at a fast pace. Now there we have a problem. The problem is many organizations, and especially MSMEs, where I'm actually spending a lot of time these days to help them, is that they use some mailing system which actually practically costs them nothing and doesn't give them any of the Outlook which has come because of the Office license, and they are using Outlook as a client. But the moment you get into a system which can provide collaborative tools, that is something that has to be looked at very seriously. The other thing is one has to also look at shared data sources within the organization and the data which is not on the transaction system, which is the ERP or the workflow systems, etc., etc. So that also one has to look at very carefully. Other applications anyway will be different for each organization depending upon what is the nature of business, what is the kind of people they interact, etc., etc. I take very simple example. Your own area, e-procurement. Before the e-procurement, look at the procurement process and look at the procurement process today. And let me tell you, let me confess, most of us IT heads also were in the habit of calling all the vendors, making them stand outside. आज हम negotiation करके deal close करने वाले हैं, तो बाहर 20 लोग बैठे हैं लाइन लगा करके, हम भी दरबार लगाते थे. वो actually सब नहीं होना चाहिए. So we have to set that example. Probably nobody should visit IT department at all other than the support people, the service people. So that is what is my view on this. Remaining of the things are naturally the applications which are valid to an organization will have to be developed, etc. But collaboration tools have to be done at a fast pace, and people have to be trained on these soft tools at a very fast pace.
Great. Now, in
and
fact,
especially senior management, especially senior management.
Yeah, I think
I have a client of mine who says, "यार आप office आ जाइए, कुछ बात करनी है." मैं बोलता हूँ, "Sir, we'll do a VC." So he says, "I'm not comfortable with VC." Now he's running a 4,000 crore worth of business. He says, "I'm not comfortable with VC. If you have a problem in traveling, I'll come to your place." He's willing to come to my place, but he's not willing to do a VC. So these are the kind of things which we'll have to resolve.
Right. In fact, that's I think something which we also reflected early, and I was nice to you for you to put it up again. Just to, because since we are running short of time, we have a few questions which are lined up. Just wanted to reflect just snippet of the World Trade Organization's report that the decline in trade costs can be especially beneficial for MSME firms from developing countries. Now, this is something which is what appealed to me the most. And this is a report which was published in 2018. And India consists of millions of MSMEs. And we are talking about developing countries, considering that the entire cost of the trade can drop significantly, the reach can improve significantly, the service level can be very effectively catered, leveraging technology. And this is something which is what I thought of highlighting when we are talking of digitization. Now, coming to the questions, I think one of the questions which is coming up that which is what I think Anil, you had reflected that the kind, and Arun, I think you had also mentioned about that when there is a work from home, there is a serious concern among the management, most management, in terms of having control and having accountability of the output. So how do you suggest any tools or any ways in which this can be achieved? Because there are companies which are, I mean, most companies, I would say, would like to have that kind of control which they are used to for donkey's years. Yeah, please go ahead.
Here to make. See, what happens is most of the organizations, and I'm still talking about MSMEs, and I'm also talking about some bigger corporates also. The accountability for saying sake is there. But if you have not done something on the stipulated timeline, then what happens? You might see one or two tough eyes on your side. You might hear one or two words, and then finally, अच्छा ठीक है आप कब कर दोगे? ठीक है सर 15 दिन में और हो जाएगा. And then you go back to that 15 days. Okay. So I think, but there are organizations where when you actually do these kind of review meetings, actually something is defined that look, this is the timeline, this has been shortfall, and this is the revised date, and that tracker is actually maintained. Now, if maintaining that tracker and maintaining the minutes of these kind of meetings becomes very, very ritual and very, very religious, then things will become easy. So today, those who say, no, how will I manage? We have to first of all ask them, how do you manage this guy today? Other than making him sit in front of you. Probably we'll get that answer. The solutions will be simpler. I'm telling you, solutions are not very difficult. You only need to know how whatever work he has done, and wherever you have quantified KPIs, there people don't look at you उसने office में आके क्या किया था. There people look at the final number of the metrics. But I think this can be done. This requires a serious change management, not a very serious technology. That's my view on this.
Yeah, because it entirely depends on which side of the bed the CIO or the CEO is getting up in the morning and what kind of dream which he's got in the night. And if he's not able to see the face of the guy and he's expected to wait for the communication, I mean, this is something which is very common.
No, so those of us who say how will we manage, for them a very good example is in case they have children in their home who are attending online classes. And I'm talking of children who are in class 4, class 5, class 6, that kind of level. And you look at their seriousness today in these classes. I am sure they will never be that serious in the class when they are sitting actually in the school. उनको इतना pressure रहता है, there's got so much of pressure on their mind. I've not done my assignment. In the evening, they will do a Zoom meeting of their colleagues and they'll discuss, have you done this? Have you done this? And they can't travel to each other's house, share your notes, send me a mail. They have learned all this. I have a granddaughter who is in 4th standard. She is today managing a project. The teacher has given her a project work and she has created her own Skype crew and she is managing the project using the tools.
Right.
So I'm sure people have to see to believe that yes, it can happen.
Yeah, I think it comes very naturally to the latest generation.
Absolutely.
It's kind of, it is built in their DNA.
Absolutely.
I think we can take the last question, which is in context, because one of the question, Arun, you already addressed in terms of the security concerns on cloud, putting data on cloud. And the other one is that how do you standardize and put your digitization plan for a bigger BCP plan? So some approach, Madhuri, if you can highlight on that.
I'm sorry, Surit, could you repeat the question? It's standardizing what?
Standardization of the process and digitization of the process, which can fit into the bigger BCP plan.
Okay, so I'm not sure what kind of processes the person is asking about, but basically when you look at, and I'm assuming these are the business processes that the person is asking about. So when you talk about BCP, like a business continuity plan, the more standard the processes are, again, I think I talked about billing earlier, you can take anything, procurement, invoice processing, whichever process you take, the more standard that process is, creating templates, creating ownership, and creating a whole plan around how to activate those templates in times of crisis, or when a BCP has to be activated becomes important. So I think, again, standardizing these processes across the entire enterprise is extremely important, because the more disjoint they are and the more exceptions you have, the tougher it is to actually fit it into a template. And so BCP is much more effective and much more efficient when you have these. I don't know if I answered the question. Might have got it.
Yes. Great. Anyway, I'd like to thank especially the panel. Very insightful and interesting insight on business critical areas, on risk mitigation and the future of business. My special thanks to all participants for sparing their valuable time, and I sincerely hope that they have found this session useful and interesting. I also wish to announce that we are going to have our next PAF 6 sessions, which will be held on 3rd of July. And you can visit procurementabengers.com site, where we will be putting up the agenda with the details of the panelists around 15th of June. I'm also happy to announce that Maven Vista would be happy to support any organization who wishes to understand and experience benefit of digitization. For this purpose, we have kind of decided to help companies who wishes to try digitize and take a digitization experience. We have launched a pack called WAP, which is Vendex Avengers pack, which can be implemented in 24 hours flat, and which can be used with or without integration with your ERP, but it's practically covering the entire landscape of sourcing with analytics. So I think if anybody wishes to try, they can get in touch with us on web@mavenvista.com. There is no cost attached to this. We are offering this free till 31st of August, and there will be a free support which will be available to the user between 10 to 6, 5 days a week. So anyone who wishes to experiment this, if any user gets qualified, they would be also entitled to a digital Avenger certificate or digital master certificate, which will be a kind of a complete administrative rights which a person has enjoyed and ensured usage, successful usage and benefits to his organization. So this is what something which we thought that we can contribute from our end to the industry. We have started PEF, and then various suggestions which came up out of PEF about the challenges in sourcing. Like Arun, Anil, you did mention about the e-procurement stuff, and I think without a digital map there could be a major challenge which organization might be facing. So we just thought that we would offer these services and ensure that they're seamlessly able to adapt. And I think nobody currently is inclined to spend a lot of time on complex implementation. So we built some of the best practices into the platform, and it can be rolled out in 24 hours flat. So having said that, I would again like to thank the panel and everybody who's participated in the session. Thank you very much. And wish you take care, and wish you all the good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, agree with you too. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.